This is Quick Reaction Budget 2013. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us. With me in studio tonight is Mr. Carl Greenidge. Carl Greenidge is an APNU Member of Parliament and, of course, the Shadow Minister of Finance in a Partnership for National Unity. Good evening and welcome, sir.
Good evening, Malika, and good evening to all guests.
All right. Now, let's jump right into it. Earlier today in the National Assembly, Finance Minister Dr. Ashley Singh rolled out a $208.8 billion budget. Now, as usual, it is the largest budget ever. Mr. Greenidge, as I said, let's jump right into it. Again, it's another year. It's another big budget. And we're not seeing that amount trickling down to the ordinary people of our nation. Are you expecting $208.8 billion to trickle down to the ordinary people of our nation this year or anytime soon?
Well, Malika, obviously, some part of that money will find its way into the pockets of some of the poor. Mm-hmm. But the issue is this, that it's not the size of the budget that matters. What matters is what you do with the money. And if you want to have a good test of how effectively these monies are being used, you have to look at what is happening to your people in general. At this point in time, it's the largest budget ever. And you have more people migrating than ever before. Okay? That is a good test of how effective your budget expenditure and revenue programs are. Now, as regards the poor, let me say that one of the common areas of common grounds between the APNU and the AFC when we were discussing the budget with the government last year was the need to ensure that of the programs that the government has, it identifies as a priority programs that address the issue of unemployment, the issue of poverty, the issue of the vulnerable, and to ensure that some meaningful packages are in place to address their needs directly. What you have in this year's budget, as has been the case since 2006, is a movement towards putting more of the budget on capital expenditure. You're putting more of the budget on capital expenditure, that is in relation to the building of roads, the building of the Marriott Hotel, the construction of big visible projects, some of which, like the Skeldon Sugar Factory, are already white elephants. These things are liked by the government because under the Jagdeo regime, and it seems that they continue with this arrangement, these projects are not so much directed at bringing income, employment, and immediate benefits to the poor, but towards giving them scope to hand out contracts to their cronies, friends of the PPP, and so forth. And that is part and parcel of a process which is consistent with the use of government power, the use of government to hand gifts so that, as we were in a TV studio, the same problem of radio licenses, the spectrum problem, same principle.
All right, let me jump in here for a bit, sir. Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned it's basically repetitive of the Jagdeo regime, and earlier you would have made some statements to the media saying that the budget reflected, and not necessarily in so many words, but the budget reflected in what former President Jagdeo would have stood for. Do you believe that Mr. Jagdeo would have somehow had a hand in this 2013 budget?
Well, it is quite possible. But whether or not he sat down with Ashley Singh, I mean, I know they're good friends, whether in fact he sat down with Singh to tell Singh what to write is immaterial. What the budget reflects is a preoccupation with those things with which Jagdeo himself was preoccupied. You see, the reason why I bothered to mention this is that the 2011 election showed that the public was dissatisfied with that mode of spending money that mode of behavior, the abuse of power, the use of power to really aggrandize yourself, your close cronies, to further promote a system of nepotism. The problem of corruption loomed very, very large. Today you have a budget, and the government does not seem concerned to address the problems that gave rise to the outcome of the 2011 elections. So you're talking again about a whole set of capital projects. Amalia, Marriott, the road to Amalia, all of these projects are embroiled in controversy. Every single one of the major projects that the government is pushing in the 2013 budget is embroiled in controversy. What is the controversy? The controversy is over secrecy in the award of contracts, lack of transparency in the award of contracts, the award of contracts to associates and friends, levels set for contracts that seem to be excessive, such as in the Marriott, the basis on which contracts are awarded are not clear. And these are the principles that Mr. Jagdeo stood for. These seem to be the principles that the government itself continues, because none of the points mentioned by Dr. Singh addresses or even seeks to at least acknowledge that the public is concerned about these things and they seek to deal with them. So in the case of Gaisuko and GPL, both of them are again massive users of funds. Okay? The first thing is they say that, well, Gaisuko will only need 1.7 billion this year. I don't believe it. Of course, this minister, more than any other, has abused the contingencies funds. All the reports of the Auditor General point to this. All our own examination points to this, which means that he will come and tell you, well, they wouldn't need as much as they needed last year, but within a few weeks, perhaps, of Parliament reconvening, he's going to come back to ask for supplementaries. Right. And let me just finish that. The same thing applies in relation to GPL. The issue here is if you recognize that corruption and poor management and political interference in the companies, these two large public enterprises, has contributed to the poor financial state they're in, then you have to be doing something about it. You're asking for money for Gaisuko and for GPL. No new plan. I see he made mention of a 2013 plan is being prepared.
All right. Let me do two things. Let me play devil's advocate here. One of the things that came out during the 2011 general elections, one of the problems that Guyana faced, and the APNU, of course, had a big problem with, was the provision of jobs, or I should say the lack of jobs for our young people. Now, during the minister's presentation today, we heard the constant mention of what has been done to provide for employment and what will be done in this 2013 budget. Isn't APNU somehow in some way satisfied with the mention of job creation? No,
we're not satisfied with mention of job creation because the government says one thing and does something else.
Okay.
Their flag project, or one of their flag projects for this year, 2013, is of course the Marriott. The Marriott is a testimony to how the government speaks with a forked tongue. So this is a big project they're talking about. It's very important that you have quality hotels and so forth, and it will bring employment because it's an investment project. But you've already, and they knew very well, they'd signed an agreement with the company in which the company is allowed to employ whomsoever it wishes, and the company has chosen to exercise that discretion given to it in the contract by employing only Chinese. I mean, this is inconceivable. We've had in the past cases in which the company comes along and says, look, either you accept this investment or you get nothing at all. We want, either you accept this arrangement in the investment. And in the past, we've said to them, well, if you want maybe to start off with 100% because you want to start quickly, and you feel it's easier for you to mobilize, that is maybe we could consider it. But by the time the project comes to an end, the construction phase even, you will have done some training and you will have absorbed and used Guyanese for these jobs. And there's nothing so skilled in building a hotel. It's not a 50-story or a 200-story hotel that can't utilize Guyanese. One of the things that under the previous regime we were very proud of is that in terms of engineering and other activities, no area was too difficult for us to do. We built one of the largest walking drag lines anywhere. It is Guyanese who engineered and put up the bridge across the Demerara River, and a whole set of major construction projects. It is a Guyanese engineer who was the consulting engineer for Venaloom, the largest at its time, and I think up to the end of the 1990s, the largest aluminium smelter built in the world. Okay? So you don't allow a country to come and tell you that you don't have the skills. Is the average Chinese contractor able to give you an analysis of Guyanese skills? He isn't. That he starts from his own position of what's convenient to him. I don't even want to say issue of prejudice. So the government talks the talk, okay, but it doesn't deliver anything. It doesn't deliver anything. So you're hearing about 400 people trained here, and after a whole set of money spent, 1,000 people there. The issue is that children are leaving school before they've completed an education, and those that leave, whether or not they're qualified, are finding it extremely difficult to find jobs. Discrimination is one on the part of the government, the poor education for some of the others, and for those who are educated, there appear not to be enough jobs. So this has to be a priority. You have to have programs built with that in mind and in filling the skills gap that you have.
Okay. Viewers, we can't possibly get through all the sectors on this evening's program, of course, because our sectors are really a whole lot, and they're really, really big. But what I want to raise with you now, Mr. Greenidge, is pension. We're already hearing the negatives coming from APNU, and not only yourself, but APNU, regarding the budget, that you're already not satisfied with what you would have heard today. But are you getting the feeling that government should probably be patted on the back for increasing the old age pension from 10 to 12?
I will need to let you finish.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
I will allow you to finish. First of all, let me just make one little more point on the employment. Mm-hmm. Employment and employment conditions are very important. Mm-hmm. We have only 3 or 4 days ago had the case of a teacher mm-hmm. standing on the roof of the Richard Ishmael secondary school to protest what appears to be the refusal to grant him no paid leave, the refusal to pay him his monies. 4 soldiers objected to what was happening to them in terms of payment of salaries which had been approved, and the ministers announcing the across-the-board payment for GDF soldiers, and yet 4 are fired for drawing to the attention of the public and going to the court the failure of the army administration and or the government to pay them. So one thing is being said and another thing is being done, and you have to bear that in mind. And what I'm also want to draw to your attention in relation to the question of pensions is this. When we discussed with government last time the issue of pensions, the move to 10,000 was regarded as an interim move. And as far as I'm concerned, the government should have paid 15,000 by the end of 2012.
That was an
and
agreement?
We should have. No, we discussed, we asked for 15. The discussion turned on 15. The government claimed it didn't have the money. It found it when they couldn't persuade us to reconvene and start the budget debate. They then tried to get the budget debate started by saying, okay, well, what we'll do in the interim, because we were not prepared to go to the parliament and say the first day of the debates would have passed, and we have to say to pensioners, the government has promised to talk. He said, deliver some money or we're not talking. They agreed the 10,000 as an interim, okay? And you notice that the interim stayed right there, okay? And now they're not even going to the 15,000, they're going to 12.5. This is at a time when the revenues that they have garnered from customs and related areas has gone up significantly, okay? When foreign exchange reserves are very strong, so they're treating that as a priority. They don't want to allow domestic expenditure to move in any way that will harm that. That part may be fine, but the government has been collecting revenues, it's generating funds. It must treat the plight of the poor and the vulnerable as a priority. That is, I believe, a view shared by most Guyanese, even those who are well off. And the growing inequalities that are manifest in the country need to be addressed. Pensioners are amongst the most vulnerable. And if you want a public service, for example, that is going to be committed and professional, one of the things people have to be sure of is that when they leave work, when they finish their years of employment, they will have a reasonable level of income. And this $12.50 that they're going to be paid, $12,500 that they're going to be paid, is something of a joke considering where we were last year. And it is also something of a joke considering that the needs of this group are fairly chronic.
All right. You mentioned this earlier, and it is a fact that we saw that increase coming, as you said, an interim increase coming after probably the first day of the debates last year. Are you expecting that kind of situation? This year, not necessarily with the pension, but are you expecting a change because the debates are scheduled to begin on the 2nd of April? As we go along, are you expecting any change from government?
Well, let me make 2 points. First of all, as regards this increase that the government has promised, it sounds great when the minister tells you it's a 25% increase. It's a 25% increase if you take it from the year-end figure to the year-end 2013 figure. But a payment is only starting in May, okay? So it isn't a 25% increase for 2013 over 2012, right? These are the little games that the minister believes, you can play with the public.
So an increase like that should have started,
at the
should be
beginning
paid for the months gone.
Yes, and they're not proposing to do that. I can't say what will happen as a result of the debates. My impression is that the government continues again in the Jagdeo style of arrogance. They don't need to speak. They don't need to have any discussions. We've met twice, but there were no discussions of any consequence. We spoke, we gave them some ideas. The government was supposed to come back. They never came back to us. They never came back to us. And I believe that they think that they can hide behind the preliminary decision of the Chief Justice, the preliminary ruling of the Chief Justice, which I've heard both the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance, in fact, the minister has written this, saying it gives them leeway to spend. Well, what kind of a democracy is it if a government can bring to the parliament, the representatives of the people, a request of 208 billion, and the parliament has no power to amend it? It can either approve it in its entirety or it can reject it.
Have you,
okay, this has to be a joke.
From listening to him today, is there anything in there that you think a partnership for national unity and maybe to some extent the AFC, I don't know how much you can speak for them, is there anything or any sector that you want to immediately jump on and approve without even scrutinizing?
No, I wouldn't say there's anything there to be approved without scrutinizing. I would have to look more carefully at what is there, but from what the minister read, there isn't anything there to be done without scrutinizing, because we feel, basically I think there's a feeling that the government has rightly pointed to fairly generous resources at its disposal, We're saying that some of those resources, or a fairer share of those resources, should be dedicated to dealing with the plight of the poor and the vulnerable. We are saying that resources should be directed in a meaningful way to a whole set of areas of social services and education. You are in a situation where the government is talking about monies available and what a wonderful job they've been doing on tourism, and every waterway in this country is littered with solid waste, to the point where in the Northwest now you have problems of gastroenteritis, and I see over the weekend mentioned in newspapers, or on Thursday, an E. coli outbreak. Where are your priorities? You know, if you follow the recommendations of the governments that were funding HIPIC and asking the government to concentrate on expenditure to relieve the poor, then the switch that the government is carrying out towards capital programs as opposed to current programs would not be taking place. Okay? You need to devote more resources to dealing with some of the current items. The government is telling you it is going to build. The minister announces that they now recognize the need for a bypass on this bank of the Demerara. Oh, goodness. I mean, 28 years, 30 years after there were proposals to have this constructed, you've suddenly discovered that was sort of a Columbus we have. Okay? So there are a number of things that may be commendable in their own right, but usually with the government it's a question of implementation. And you will find a number of passages in the budget in which the minister is repeating promises he made last year of things that should have been done last year. They've reappeared in this year's budget without him indicating. Now, they love to quote my budget statements from the past, because those budget statements were candid. If we had undertaken to do A, B, C, D, and they weren't done, criticism, self-appraisal was done, and the ministers in whose purview these inadequacies were manifest were not spared. In this case, they simply repeat the promise in the hope that nobody reads the old budget, nobody can remember that. You having a repeat of a whole number of things, passage of legislation, a promise to do better with Gaisuko this year, GPL.
Sir, on that note,
without fixing anything.
I must ask you this. It's unfortunate that I have to bring it up, but if government is being accused by yourself and probably APNU of bringing back things that were in the budget before and not having a budget that suits all of Guyana, once again, the issue of Greenidge not being available for talks may come up. I'd like to give you an opportunity to probably speak on that for a little while, because you're going to get the argument that if Greenidge had presented himself with APNU, things that they wanted to go into the budget may have gone into that. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, sir. Go ahead.
Well, let me start off by being very candid with you. This is utter rubbish.
Okay.
Okay? The minister, from the beginning of November, I gather, was directed by the president to have the meetings. It took him a number of weeks to have the meetings. When the first meeting was held, he asked the opposition to provide him with material on what the opposition thought were objectives, instruments and tools that should be part of the budget and so forth. We did that. That information was provided within a couple of weeks. Once more, many weeks passed, and the minister didn't see it fit to call a second meeting until in a press conference, I indicated our unhappiness with this. He then scrambled to convene a meeting. Okay? That meeting was held at which he was not in a position to react to the proposals that had been put to him. Okay? Now, we then asked him to prepare information that he had promised and provide us with that information so that there can be a meaningful discussion and exchange. On February 26th or thereabouts, he indicated, I think it was a Tuesday, that they were ready to meet. They wanted to meet a Thursday, which happened to be the day that the Public Accounts Committee was meeting. Okay, and I told him that we couldn't meet on that day, and that either myself or Lance Carberry would get back to him, and that was in writing, regarding an alternative date. As far as I'm concerned, no alternative date was agreed, and no alternative date was agreed because, on the one hand, we did not get any assurance from the AFC that they were ready to meet, okay, whatever the reason. That is one side of it. But the other was, looking at the documentation, a good deal of the documents in there were taken as documents straight out of the budget, out of the current estimates. The estimates that are there, they took them out. So you've already printed a whole set of documents for the budget, and then you come and hand it to us, and this is supposed to be the basis of a discussion that is supposed to facilitate refinements and amendment to the budget. The time available for a discussion at that point was not sufficient. Now, as regards my presence, this is a diversion. It's a red herring. I am the spokesman for finance and related matters. There is in the cluster, there are other members in that grouping. There are arrangements within the APNU that formed part of my note to the APNU on budget matters, and the APNU agreed that if Dr. Singh had been true to his promise to have a series of meetings, then some of those meetings would have focused upon straight fiscal matters in which you're dealing with taxation, and I certainly would have been part of those. Some of them would have been dealing with road building, road construction. Some of them would have been dealing with Marriott. Some of them would have been dealing with transfers such as old age pensions. And in those circumstances, other persons would have been part of the meeting. I gave no undertaking. I was required to give no undertaking. And I would have given no undertaking to be at every single meeting on the budget discussion. And it would be foolish to expect me to. It's normal, all sorts of elements are in there. You wouldn't expect the minister either to be at every single meeting, okay? Because we anticipated a series of meetings. Clearly, he had in mind a couple of meetings for showing the press that some meeting was taking place, and so it's very important that the two heads be there. But the point is that if you have a series of meetings, the series of meetings are held, and if there's a query about any of the individual meetings, in the final set of meetings, the two spokesmen on each side would speak with a view to resolving the issue. My presence, and I have never put it in the power of the PPP to decide when I'll be in the country and when I'll not be in the country. So if they're going to have a meeting with us, the APNU will make arrangements for somebody to represent the APNU. I'm not guaranteeing, I'm never guaranteed, I'm never required to guarantee that I will be here at the beck and call of the minister. It is to me astonishing that anybody but the minister should be treating this as a serious discussion. I am a professional economist. I have work to do. I am living in a country where a government has set about systematically denying me work within Guyana and outside of Guyana. Everybody knows that by now. So I can't sit in Guyana expecting to be fed simply by working locally. And if I were to depend upon the pay from Parliament, it would pay my electricity bill and little else. It would fund my electricity bill and little else. Certainly, it wouldn't fund petrol to go visiting constituencies about the country. The Constitution as regards parliamentarians today, is heavily biased in favor of the traditional professions of law and medicine, which professions have control over their time. So they can go to surgery, whether it is a legal or medical surgery in the morning, and they can do parliament in the afternoon, some afternoons of the week. Okay? My work requires that I be sometimes out of the country for extended periods. Okay? And it was never, I never gave an undertaking to anybody, least of all the government, that, you know, if you have a meeting, I guarantee I'll be there. The undertaking was, here is a proposed date from the minister. And I, on behalf of myself, saying, yes, this is a convenient date, we will meet on that date. At some point, I will indicate to him who the members of the team are. In fact, the minister usually writes asking who the members of the team. If you know that the team is a fixed team and it never changes, why on earth would you be asking me this?
All right. As we approach wrap-up time, I have two other quick issues I want to deal with. After all of that is said and done, are you willing, probably during the debates, if it is proposed, are you at this stage willing to probably sit down with Minister Singh to find some sort of compromise or common ground regarding the 2013 budget?
The 2013 budget has already been announced.
So there is nothing
the chances of changing anything of significance are practically nil. Okay? These are supposed to be tripartite meetings. I can only speak on behalf of the APNU. The APNU believed on the 26th of February and on the 4th of March, whenever it was, that the time available would not allow for a meaningful discussion of proposals that would cover those areas that were of concern to the APNU and of concern to the AFC. I want to make that very clear. You can't agree with us that we will spend, let us say, 3 months, whatever, discussing something. You have, in 2 months, you have one meeting, and they've never suggested that we failed or refused or I wasn't available in those 2 months because I was there. I never went anywhere. And then for the last month, you use up 3 weeks, and then in the last week of February, you suddenly are saying, well, if only the meeting was held on the 1st of February or the 28th of February, everything would have been hunky-dory. This is utter nonsense. You've got to feel that you're dealing with idiots to be suggesting that. You have 3 months within which to make arrangements to discussion. I fashion my own time and my international commitments amongst that. What also compounded it is that I could not be expected to know that the parliamentary session would be suspended, and a suspension that would normally be for an hour turned into weeks. In my years in Parliament, I have never seen that, and I don't know, certainly in the UK, which I'm familiar with the parliamentary procedures there, anything like that has ever happened. So these were exceptional circumstances, and I will not take responsibility for something that had nothing to do with us. Both of those decisions, the decision not to hold the meetings at the level of the committee and the decision not to convene the Parliament immediately after the matter of the disruption was resolved, were not in my hands. Okay? And in the light of that, I don't think that I can be held responsible for a meeting that the minister had no intention of holding. What needs to happen is for the minister to explain to his president why he has so much difficulty fixing meetings. It is not as though it's the first time it's happened. And on the previous occasions, I have letters to the minister urging him to meet, urging him to agree an agenda, okay? Asking him for information before the meetings. Okay, you can't meet next week, at least provide us with this written information. Which information is set out in the law? Nothing. And now you suddenly find it convenient. You heard that I'm not here to say, well, this has to be the reason why we couldn't meet. Nonsense. The minister has met with other people prior to my arrival, and under the old regime, he's met and had discussions with some of the people that are part of the team that would be examining these matters. It is not for the minister of the PPP to determine who will be on the opposition side. If the opposition chooses to send a team without me, it's none of his business.
All right. Finally, sir, just so the public is clear, what are APNU's initial thoughts on Budget 2013, and what can our nation expect during the debates for Budget 2013?
Well, I think in the course of the 2013 debate, you are going to get, if both the opposition parties are consistent with the pronouncements before and the analysis that they provided before, you are going to get a lot of criticism of this budget. Okay? You are also going to get a resistance to the amounts that the minister is seeking to spend on a variety of areas for which we do not have satisfactory explanations. And worst of all, you have a budget that is largely meaningless because some of the biggest elements of public sector expenditure fall outside of that budget. And on top of that, you have a minister who is committed to using the contingency as an alternative device for bringing the entire fiscal statement before the House. So you don't put down all the expenditure you expect to undertake. You put a proposal, you tell them how wonderful you are, the fiscal deficit is so low, it's never been lower, and then 2 months later, if that long, because after the 2012 budget, I don't even think 2 months passed before we were asked for 24 billion or whatever it was for GPL. Okay? Which means that the balance, what appears to be a balance, is not a balance at all because you don't have all the expenditures given to you. The minister has to get around to the fact that this is a parliament in which they don't have a majority and they have to live by the rules. They have to live by the rules. The rules require that you bring to the House the expenditures, all the expenditures you propose to undertake, and not hide them by all sorts of devious accounting devices.
All right. Thank you very much. APNU Member of Parliament and Shadow Minister of Finance, Mr. Greenidge. It was certainly a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, Malika. It's been a pleasure on my part, too.
All right, great. Viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. I am Malika Ramsey. Do enjoy what's left of your day. This has been Quick Reaction Budget 2013. Goodbye.